Right then, let's dive into it. Okay, what is going on, ladies and gents? Welcome back to a brand new episode of the number one student podcast in the world, the Student Podcast. Today we're here with episode 15. We've got a special guest with us today. We've got Hamza, who is a master's student studying or was studying at Westminster University. His Two Worlds Design page showcases his research in responsive architecture and his passion towards architectural psychology. So hello Hamza.
Hello, how's it going, man?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. I'm just trying to figure out what I'm looking at because I've got my camera videoing me here, and this is me talking to you, right? And then I've got you here. So, okay, I think I got it.
Yeah, just bear with us, people, because this is the first time we're filming, obviously, or me trying to film a podcast over Zoom, because obviously the whole coronavirus, we're all in lockdown. So usually I'd have someone sat next to me talking, but we're going to just try and get this one done. Hopefully everything will go smoothly. If we obviously have any hiccups along the way, we do apologise, but we're going to try our best. So yeah, thank you, Hamza, for coming on. How does it feel to be? So Hamza's give some context. He's literally just finished his masters at Westminster University in London. How does it feel to be finished with your master's degree or your part two?
I don't know. I mean, it's a weird one. Obviously, leading up to pressing submit on the computer, and when I started deleting all my files on my PC, like, oh wow, I'm actually deleting my model file. I'm cleaning up my PC. I felt a sense of like, oh my god, this is all done. But I think there's something missing in the excitement that I had when I finished my bachelor's, because obviously we were able to have a graduation ceremony. We were able to be around our mates. We were able to kind of be in an environment that allowed us to really let it sink in. So because of COVID, I almost feel like it hasn't sunk in properly.
Yeah, it's strange.
Yeah, it just feels like I've gone from one thing to the next, because now the job, now I have to look for it. I have to see how my job application goes.
Yeah. It's very strange, especially because obviously I'm in that position that you just described about you're meant to be having your graduation, so I'm obviously meant to be having my graduation in next month, and it's one of those situations where it's a bit of like an anti-climax. You work so hard at university for 3 years or 5 years in your case, and you kind of build yourself up for that moment when you submit. Obviously at university, usually you'd go into university, you'd pin your work up, you'd do your presentation would go well, or you get some really good feedback at your portfolio submission. And obviously we don't have that. You kind of just submit your work, you're there on your own. You're not really there with your peers. You don't have this kind of studio environment. It's kind of just like, what do I do with myself now? Where do I go? What do I do? And it is very kind of anticlimactic, and it's a bit of a weird one.
There's a lot of conversation going on right now, articles being put out there about how we're going to adapt to the new home working conditions.
Yeah.
Usually those articles are talking about, specifically work, but obviously, you and I, we're students. We know that this applies to university as well, and God knows what university is going to be like for the next generation or the next term of people going in. Yourself, actually, you might be looking for a job, but let's say people joining in September, are they going to start off by working from home? It's a strange thing to consider, but one thing that has been coming up in all these articles is the fact that we need those rituals. We need the feeling of getting up, getting ready, getting some nice cologne on, looking good, going to your place of work, and being in a studio culture. So as much as we are going to adapt to like this new, all these new technology and home working environment, we have to also remember that we need that ritual.
Yeah,
so
100%.
How do we adapt to a new normal is the question.
Yeah, it's a part of the architecture culture. Essentially, being in that studio environment, it's in a lot of ways that is what kind of creates us as students and as architects, because it's a very collaborative subject, and you need to be around people to kind of bounce ideas off people. Obviously, it's a creative subject. It's the same with any kind of creative kind of workplace within the industry. you need that collaborative space. And obviously if we don't have that with being in lockdown, it's completely different, and it's a completely different way of teaching, a completely different way of learning. And it is very strange. And obviously, like you mentioned, with even going into jobs and having that kind of routine of getting up at a certain time every morning, having your morning coffee, having your breakfast, getting on the train to your workplace, meeting your friend just before for a coffee or whatever. You need that routine, you need that structure, to not only to keep and maintain motivation, but even for like mental well-being. You need that kind of interaction with people and that kind of that social aspect side of the whole architecture collaboration kind of working environment.
Yeah, for sure, man.
So yeah, what was the moment like? Obviously, we've discussed about a bit of an anticlimactic experience handing in your work, but what was that moment like when you kind of clicked that submission button?
I mean, like I said, I just pressed submit. There's like I said, there was not much more to it. I didn't feel like I honestly didn't feel like a massive like confetti bomb go over my head or anything. It felt a bit vacuous due to the fact that we are not around each other, because we're around our families and friends maybe, or and the only people we can really relate to the most in our particular culture and field is our peers, is our students and co-workers. So yeah, I didn't feel much.
So how do you think this whole lockdown situation will how do you think that would actually change the way students study and work? How do you think it will all become obviously I feel like in recent times Instagram is beginning to create kind of that online community culture, and like we had our live Q&A a couple of weeks ago, that was kind of like a moment where we kind of understood that we do have this online culture and we can still continue to push that, but um yeah, so do you think it will become more of an online kind of Facebook group things, or how do you think it will work in being at home and being in lockdown?
Well, like I said, I don't think we're going to be able to get rid of the studio culture. I don't think we're going to be able to get rid of office culture. I think it's going to take some time for this kind of wound to heal, for people to feel kind of normal again. Um, but obviously, we're talking about a new normal here. We're talking about everything has changed. Unfortunately, we can't be nostalgic and say, we want to get exactly how we were before. It's not possible. We have to accept that right now we're going to head for something new. And in some ways, you could look at that in an exciting way. You could look forward to, oh, what's the new normal going to be? What do I think it is? Well, obviously, it's going to involve some sort of higher level of technological integration. Is going to involve some level of higher expectancy from the universities and from your workplace for you to be more savvy with technology. Therefore, more education on technology, more accessible technology. There's going to be maybe there's going to be another technological boom of the multimedia and video in the multimedia and video side of things. But when it comes to actual university, it's a difficult one to try and predict right now because, I mean, for example, I'll give you an example. My university put a questionnaire out yesterday or the day before, asking us what do we think, what do we want to see in the next couple of weeks or months in terms of how they respond to this COVID thing when it comes to looking for job prospects and how the university should kind of manage itself. And one thing becoming apparent to me is they're going to be looking for more innovative ways that you yourself as a student can facilitate your own studies. Now, how that is, whether that means you're going to have some sort of tutoring scheme or mentoring scheme that could happen at home and is much more flexible, that could be an option. But to be honest, for me, I think in the long term, we're going to go back to the physical realities of our life. We're going to go back to studios. We're going to go back to the office. But there is going to be a noticeable change in the way we behave. I think people are going to be
Yeah.
a lot less kind of touchy-feely and social,
100%.
socially kind of close. But also, one thing I'm really passionate about is adaptable architecture. And I think our spaces in studio, our spaces in the office are going to have to be adaptable. That, for example, if we enter into another lockdown, if the R rate goes up, then maybe we start shifting and adapting the office space to allow for the right protocols to take place.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I think it's definitely, this is what I was talking about with my mates yesterday, is this whole lockdown thing. We've kind of been drilled into this idea that even going near another human being is not okay. Like it's this really weird situation. Like I'd go, obviously now that some of the restrictions have been lifted and we can go to people's gardens or whatever and sit at social distancing, groups of six or whatever. So when I've been sat with my mates in a garden or at the park or something, it's like this weird like feeling of like I want to go give you a hug because like say hello, but I can't do it, and it's strange. And I feel like this is going to be a very long-term thing. Like you say, obviously at the same time, though we're going to have to adapt once again when we come out. So as architecture, we've got to begin to design spaces that can allow for those changes to happen. So how do you think spaces could be adapted to facilitate these situations that we might be social distancing or less
Good question.
interactive? And do you have any idea of how these spaces could be adapted?
Good question, man. I haven't done any proper kind of design explorations for this. However, my projects since the beginning of my bachelor's, all the way up until my final project that I submitted a couple of days ago, there was this weird moment where I was making my portfolio for my job application, and I was like, holy shit. I can see there's this one concept that goes throughout all of my projects, and there was this weird sense of like I've just discovered something about myself, and I was actually kind of excited that, oh my god, there's something stylistic about me, which was an anxiety I had growing up, and I think maybe anxiety I had through architecture school, that I think maybe a lot of other students might have, which is, oh, I need a style. Oh,
Yeah,
I need a particular way of doing architecture. And I would say what works, and what could be more favorable is if you just let the style kind
yeah,
of realize
happen.
itself.
Yeah, just happen.
And amazingly, in my final year, fifth year, I noticed I had a style,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
was amazed to see it. And for me, the style has been adaptive, responsive, uh, architecture that explores the experiential aspects of our space and architecture. So for me, I was like, wow, I finally see what I'm
I made
passionate
it.
about. Yeah, well, at least I made it to a starting point. So if I was to kind of tell you about what I think could be good adaptive architecture today, I think again it would be quite anticlimactic, because one thing with adaptable architecture, I think a lot of people get gassed when they see like, oh, kinetic architecture, or they'll see types of architecture that is completely data integrated, and there's smart technology kind of seeping through every hole of the building. And it's like, actually, from what I've realized through my current project, is adaptable architecture is actually very simple most of the time.
Yeah,
It's a very humble, and it's a very kind of mechanized thing, in the sense, what I mean by that is, it doesn't have to be a completely technocentric or technophilic kind of mechanism. Sometimes adaptable architecture is you picking up the top of a chair, turning it over, and suddenly it becomes a table.
yeah, yeah,
So there's an incredible simplicity when it comes to adaptable architecture. I think some people might overlook in the need to try and be kind of overly complex. And I personally have been there. And, you know, I've, in some ways, my project that I've just done is kind of going, you know, knee deep into high tech architecture. But when I think of the practical implications, for example, the question you asked about how do we see office spaces using adaptable architecture, I don't think it needs to be incredibly high tech. I don't think that's practical. I don't think that's affordable. I don't think that's a democratic way of doing it. You know, I think it is as simple as turning a chair over and it becomes a table. So, for
Yeah.
example, with COVID, I mean, I could speculate that, you know, obviously personal space is going to be an incredibly important thing. So maybe the way in which you can increase the footprint of the internal footprint, that is. So maybe the way you can change the walls and the partitions within an office space, the ways in which you can you know, extend and contract spaces could be a really interesting thing to look at. Also, the ways you can navigate, the ways you can manipulate airflow, because obviously, you know, I was reading an article by someone who pointed out a lot of the changes that we can expect to see, and one of them is going to be, you know, we're going to need to have a lot more natural airflow into our buildings. We can't deal with any recycled airflow systems anymore, because I don't want to be breathing in, you know, someone else's air who might have COVID, for example. So there's going to be, I think there's going to be a lot more integration with how you adapt spaces to be more open to nature and kind of the natural environment. But there's also going to be a shift perhaps in the way our office spaces can expand and contract. I mean, those are some of the ways I can see office spaces and university spaces changing.
Yeah. I think the most important thing you said there is keeping it simple. I think, like you say, I feel like when in architecture, you very much overlook the simplicity behind. Though architecture is obviously, it's very obviously it's a multidisciplinary, it's very complex, but in a lot of ways it's very simple at the same time. It's just ways of kind of manipulating objects or space to completely change an environment or the activities or just things that take place within that space. It's just so simple at the end of the day. And before kind of diving into discussing exactly what kind of you explored in your final master's project, because I'm intrigued talking about architectural psychology, because a lot of, in some ways, when I was looking through your Instagram and reading kind of your post about I think it was your front cover of your master's project. In some ways, I was kind of looking at that thinking like that is kind of what I've been doing as well. And that was a bit of like a realization moment for me as well. I was kind of thinking like this whole time I've been designing spaces that responds to the experience, the journey, and obviously manipulating spaces in terms of width, height, angles. And a lot of my work was testing how we can speed up or slow down people through spaces, depending on the internal environment and the internal experience, using light and dark, even using like concrete as like a canvas. Like Louis Kahn discusses in some of his articles about light matters and how you can use concrete as a canvas for shadow, and creating these internal spaces. And so a lot of my design was about using ramps, stairs, changing directions, diversions that would go above and underground, all to manipulate the speed at which people move through the spaces. So we might as well just go into what. So have a quick summary of how of what your kind of final master's project was about, and what were you aiming to explore or resolve? Or
Yeah, before I say that, I think you said something quite crucial there, and it's one thing I've realized recently is I personally was under the illusion, and I think a lot of other students are under the illusion, that we have this incredible kind of power to come up with completely new ideas and completely new paradigms in architecture. When suddenly, when you start to really explore what everyone else is doing and you start to open your eyes up to not just your own work, you realize, oh wow, everyone's doing something that's pretty much similar to everyone else.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's quite important to think about in architecture, is all of our projects are somewhat related because we're all in the same field, and we're all kind of working under similar parameters.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of feeling in architecture university of like, oh, this is my work, this is my idea. Oh, you took my idea, or you took this, or you took that. It's one thing I think we need to start realizing is we're all working to try and do the same things, but that's not to say that we can't have our own kind of individual pursuits. I think the way in which we change, the way in which we do similar things, but in different methods, that should be celebrated. But it's something to keep note of, that don't get too attached to the idea that what you're doing is something completely new. Embrace the fact that everybody is trying to do something similar. You are just exploring your own method of doing it. And I think having a kind of method-centric approach to your design is a nice way to go. Anyway, when it came to my project, again, I've told you that adaptable architecture, responsive architecture is a kind of theme that was consistent throughout my work. But you also mentioned another huge passion of mine, which is architectural psychology. However, I would argue that these two things are incredibly connected. Adaptability and the psychology of the people occupying the space. And to quickly explain how that is, well, if you think about the fact that, I'm sitting in a room right now, you're sitting in a room, the way in which you behave affects the way the space is arranged. Now, if you turn it the other way, the way in which the space is arranged also affects the way in which you behave. So what you have is, if there's an interchangeability between the space, if there's an adaptability to the space and the components within space, then arguably there's also a change in the behavior of the person occupying the space. And an easy example to understand that is, if you walk in your kitchen, you're going to have a noticeable difference of behavior than you would if you were walking into your bedroom. And so what's the difference between the bedroom and the kitchen? Well, they're all four walls and materials that use the same material. It's all tactile, the built world. Only difference is the way in which the materials are different.
Yeah.
It's the ways in which perhaps the furniture in the room is arranged. It's the difference in which the light affects the space around you. So there's many components to it. So with my project, I was looking at, find a way to make this concise because it's super deep. I was looking at the way the brief of the studio was looking at how you could integrate the Internet of Things and data into your architecture and make it somewhat adaptable. And so that was the perfect studio for me to choose. I jumped on it. I'm like, that's exactly what I want to do.
Yeah.
And so I started off looking at behavioral data. So what happens when you collect data from an individual and try to make an architecture that responds to it. So the starting point I looked at, and a lot of people, if they go through my Instagram, they'll see super strange drawings of beds. I started from the starting point of a bed, because if you think about the millennials' bed today, it's the place where you wake up, you get on your phone straight away, and even today it's even more critical. It's even more kind of relevant that we get our laptops, we put our laptops on our laps in bed, we start working, we start emailing, we start doing everything from bed. And it's this idea that your bed becomes actually the primary source of collecting valuable data of the human. And then another crucial aspect of data collection when it comes to the bed is the fact that most of us have health apps already, by default downloaded onto our phone. But a lot of us download, health apps that have sleep monitoring software on it. So on an Apple, you've got Sleep Cycle, which is integrated into your phone already. And on Samsung, you've got Samsung Health, which does that. So what that does is it uses an accelerometer, which is a device that measures your movement. And it also uses a sound sensor, which measures the deepness and the speed of your breathing. And with those particular kind of threads of data, it's able to ascertain how deep you sleep, because the slower your breaths from the sound sensor, the deeper your sleep. The less you move, the more dead you are, the deeper your sleep. So your phone is an incredible device for measuring your behavior, in the sense that it knows what your optimal sleeping patterns are. Now, to cut the long story short, that concept of a highly responsive bed. I looked at an absurd bed, kind of a Wallace and Gromit feel, the bed that kind of comes out and puts things in front of you that you need. And I really went into the satire and irony of creating an absurd mechanism, a bed that could do everything you need. And that concept developed slowly into, scaling this idea up of a behavior, a responsive system to human behavior. And what I ended up with was a pod that I designed, a responsive pod that's able to give you the most perfect sleeping environment. And then the larger kind of super project within that is I designed something called the Sleep Institute, which is a proposal for London, where it's what's called a living labs, i.e. it's a place where data is collected and implemented within the existing framework of the architecture, but also like a retreat for Londoners to get out of the commuters' hustle and bustle, and come and take some time at this research facility to take some time out and increase their sleeping health, if you like. But it's hard to summarize this project quickly. I think if people want to understand this properly, just have a look at my Instagram. I'm going to be slowly putting out content that explains it properly.
Yeah, cool. Sounds crazy. Sounds mad. It sounds like something I'd definitely like to have a little read of the portfolio, if you, at some point, if I could, or something like that. Sounds interesting. Obviously, like you say, I think even with like my projects, undergraduate, it's very difficult to summarize a project, especially when there's that much depth and detail. And obviously you don't, I think one of the most important things is that you go off through your design development, you go off on tangents and you go down different pathways, and there's obviously a lot behind a final project before you actually get there. Something I wanted to expand on as well is that when you discussed about the living room and or your bedroom and the kitchen, and the kind of the contrast between the two in terms of the furniture in the spaces, the lighting, but it's also about kind of the sentimental and the value you have within those spaces, and the experience that you have that you can relate to those spaces. So you have moments where you're in your bedroom and you've watched this amazing film or something, you have a moment where you relate that to that space. Or if you're cooking and you have an amazing meal with your wife or your girlfriend, and you have that amazing moment in that space. And even though they're so similar, the slight change in objects, in lighting and temperature and the spatial arrangement completely changes those moments that you have in those spaces. It completely kind of shapes that. I thought that was interesting when you said that. That kind of just ringed in my head, me thinking about that then, which I think is really interesting.
Man, what you've just touched on is another really interesting concept, which is very appropriate to bring up here, because yes, they're the things I was describing, which are the kind of the raw factors, the kind of the more kind of baseline factors of how a space can affect your behavior, which is to do with the actual just practical and physical parameters and components of that space. But there are also the kind of phenomenological or the immaterial aspects of space that have a huge effect on you. And you touched upon them, and that is, as a concept I talked about in my podcast with Adam Furman on episode 2, and it's called it's the value of object. And this is where this is where architecture can take a different approach. For example, in the postmodernist in the postmodernist field. But what you talked about, the idea that your memories are embedded into space. Now that's a concept that I was super passionate about when I started to get into architecture. And there's a famous book called The Poetics of Space by Gaston Bachelard, a phenomenologist, famous thinker. Highly recommend you read that if you haven't. Where he talks about how our space is essentially a physical archive of our memories. Yeah. And that's what you were describing, and an amazing analogy that I spoke with Adam Nathaniel Furman about, and he talked about this in one of his lectures. Is, let me give you an analogy, right? So you don't. I hope this is not a too personal question to you, but have you ever walked into the room of someone who's recently passed away?
No.
You haven't? Okay. So imagine you have. Okay. So imagine someone really close to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Imagine they passed away.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to do this to you.
Now, that's all right. Yeah.
Now imagine you walk into the room that they used to do everything in. That was their master room where they used to have all their possessions. They used to write crazy things and stick them up on the wall, and they used to wear, you could even smell their clothes. You could even see what they were talking about the day before on a notepad. So all of these objects that start to give you an idea of who this person is. The idea is that those are a lot more powerful stimulators for us to understand identity and for us to understand the individual, as compared to, for example, if you had just talked about the person, or if you'd just seen the body of the person. The example that I often give is I have had that experience. Yeah. My grandma died however long ago, and I was really young, but I remember when I walked into the room and her body was there, and she's someone I was very close to. But when I went and I sat next to her body, I didn't even have, I didn't cry, and I was looking at her body and I was like, why am I not sad? This is a really strange thing. Am I a bad being? And I kind of wandered off in confusion, and I sat down in her room. And when I sat on her room, I heard the creak of her bed that I recognized. I looked around and I saw her possessions. I could smell her natural perfume, and then I saw the cupboard that she used to open to give us sweets from. And suddenly the floodworks opened, the floodgates opened. I started crying my eyes out. And what that shows you is that when it comes to space, and when it comes to object, and when it comes to these material but also immaterial aspects of space, there's so many different components at play that give us the true kind of holistic experience of space. And one of them is one you mentioned, which is the memories that we have within that space.
Yeah. Man, a lot to consume for people.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. So you talk about this kind of level of understanding about space and the experience, and obviously it's quite you can tell you've done your research, and you can tell you've explored this. In your undergraduate, was this the kind of level you were thinking at? And what was that kind of transition going from your undergraduate to kind of adapting to your masters, and kind of what was that transition between the two? I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but because I'm intrigued to see how, because obviously I've just finished my undergraduate and I want to get myself ready for a master's. What was that jump like between from the undergraduate moving into a course where you very much tailored towards a certain type of thinking about architecture, and you've kind of gone into this certain direction with your work. How did you get there from your undergraduate course?
Well, I think there's a lot of anxieties that students will have before going to masters, even related to jobs, even related to which university should I pick, or which should I apply to, what do I need to think of a project now, or oh my God, what's my dissertation going to be like? So there's a lot of anxiety, and I think what you're doing by trying to give that people access to information that might settle those anxieties, it's a great thing to do. So well done for doing that.
Thank you.
What I would say is, don't be anxious. I would say don't be anxious. Don't be trying to force yourself into thinking you need to have a project in mind. That by the way, that's a big warning I give to everyone, because it's something I used to do all the time. I used to have to like physically stop myself thinking of an end product when the tutor's like reading out the brief. I've already got like 3 project ideas in my head, and I'm like, just stop.
Yeah, I'm exactly
Just,
the same.
yeah, and it's a problem because
Yeah.
you've got to be part of the process. And as you probably already know and are learning, it's in the process and in the kind of flexibility of your design process that you end up with a strong project.
Mm-hmm.
It's when you and yes, there comes a point where you have to say, okay, this is what I'm doing, commit to it. But that comes quite far down your project, and it's the job of your tutor, I would argue, to guide you in letting you know when you should start to commit to these ideas, because they're reviewing your ideas regularly. Which, by the way, I would say, I think a lot of people do it anyway, but I would really recommend people do it more. And it's have your own peer groups of people who you constantly talk to about your ideas. Because in some ways you're all mini tutors for each other, and that should be the case. I think I often would just bore the crap out of people by telling them my projects, and I would love to hear their projects. I would walk around studios constantly, partially because I feel like my attention span's a bit crap sometimes, and partially because I was just intrigued by what this person was doing in what studio.
Yeah.
So I think first thing I would say is relax and don't worry about going into your masters, because what I'm about to tell you might come as a surprise, but it's true, and things get easier for students as they go into masters.
Yeah.
That could sound controversial, because obviously
why?
the level of work that's expected from you is much, much higher. You can't be doing half-assed work. But when I say it gets easier, the catch to that is, I'm obviously assuming that the person I'm talking about is passionate about architecture. And if you're passionate about architecture, you will embrace the higher kind of quality of work expected from you, because you inevitably are increasing in your skills as an architecture student anyway. So the jump is good for those people who are passionate about architecture.
Yeah.
The jump is very bad for people who are on the fence with architecture. Yeah. I think if you're on the fence with architecture and you finish your bachelor's and you really don't think this is for you, don't do your master's. It's 2 years of high level work that you probably don't want to do, especially if you're not kind of invested into it properly. And I personally, I advocate for looking at, many other ventures when it comes to, what you do with your architectural degree, because one thing I am, again, also passionate about is the multidisciplinary aspects of architecture. And I've interviewed a lot of people on the Design Talk podcast about, what you can do with an architectural background in various different other fields, and people have done incredible things. So for people like you who are committed to the field and who are, great at design, I've seen your work, it's good.
Thank you.
Is to the key thing for you guys is to not worry. as strange as that sounds.
Yeah.
Don't worry, but go into it open-minded. And a bit of practical advice would be, if you are if you're going to a course structure that that doesn't, for example, grade your first year of masters, which I think a lot of university courses do that, which can be frustrating, but let's not get into that. Is be as experimental as you can in your first year, especially if it's ungraded. Really explore something that you might not be completely comfortable with, and then in the second year, you will understand a lot more about yourself. You'll be like, oh, okay, this is where I want to go, and you'll choose the best studio in your second year. And in your second year, obviously, you need to really get your head down and produce a piece of a project, piece of work that you're proud of. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pressure in architecture school, where some studios demand a specific style, where they demand you to be a certain way and things like that. I personally think it works for some, very few. It works for very few studios, I personally believe. But I would say make sure you prioritize what you want to do. What are you passionate about? Because that's the year that you need to start to figure out, you as an architectural practitioner, what you could be doing in the future. And that's the strongest portfolio you're going to take to your employers, to be like, hey, look, this is me.
Yeah.
So masters is a beautiful thing, because I feel like it completely rounds you off as an architectural practitioner, and helps you understand what you want to do.
Yeah, a lot of the things you said there is very much a lot of things that I preach about the undergraduate course, and understanding, firstly, talking about not forcing projects and how important it is to let things naturally evolve. And a lot of people really, really struggle because they think they know what they want to do, and they think they know what the project is and the right way to go down things, but they're forcing that idea and it's not working, and they're constantly forcing that idea and it's not working. And then they'll get to a month away and they'll have this breakdown when they'll realize this kind of this moment of realization that this isn't, they've completely wasted all this time forcing this project and trying to get things out. And I think, like you say, that is when your tutors definitely come in handy, where they're obviously there to tell you if you are doing the right thing and you are heading in the right direction. And obviously, a lot of the times you're hanging on to these project ideas and these concepts. You don't want to let go, but the tutors are there and telling you, you need to let go of this because this is not going to get you anywhere. This is not going to get you the grade you want. But essentially, you need to go through that experience to understand what is the right thing and what's not the right thing to do, in the way you want to represent your work, the way you want to show your personality through your work, what you enjoy doing and what you don't enjoy doing. And I think in the undergraduate, very much third year is that year where you begin to find your own style, or find what you're interested in, to kind of start shaping yourself before going into the world of architecture, going out there and getting a job. And I think third year is
Mate,
very, very important about that.
Yeah, I would even say, personally, I feel like keep experimenting until you get to your fifth year, because honestly, like, having a portfolio that shows diverse set of skills, you're sick at doing renders, and you're also sick at doing perfectly detailed and crisp line drawings, and you're also sick at doing really conceptual abstract drawings, and we could go on. The world of drawing is one that's so rich, and the way in which you represent your work is so rich. So when I say be diverse as you can, one thing that studios differ in quite a lot is their representation style. So think about it this way: if you're going shopping, imagine you walk into a mall, you're like, all right, I want to get some bits, and you've been given loads of money. Or forget the mall, let's say you walk into a market, and you're and there's a fruit market. Now you've got 10 pounds and £1 a punnet, whatever. You go in there, you're not going to buy 10 punnets of strawberries. You're not going to buy a tower of strawberries. You're going to go, oh, I want a bit of orange, I'm going to get a bit of mango, I might try a bit of this, I might try a bit of that. I say treat your architecture education like a fruit market.
Yeah.
Go in there and try to pick up as many different flavors as you can.
Yeah.
You know, because then when you come out, you then become an architectural. And if I was an employer and I saw someone who can do, you know, everything, they're just the most skillful, you know, let's say the Bartlett type student who comes out of CJ Lim's studio, who just let's say all of their work is like that, and it's just all abstract fact, you know, fantastical fictional work. You know, one employer might love that,
Yeah.
but will
Not
the
all of
vast
them.
majority of
Yeah.
employers, lean towards that? No. So do you want to? Would you rather be someone who goes for one particular employer and limit your chances of employment and your opportunities, or would you be a highly decorated practitioner?
But then also within that, once you're in the firm, you need to be able to also adapt to certain situations where if someone asks you to do something, if they've asked you to do a render, you could be like, yes, I can do that render. That's fine. If they ask you to do
Exactly.
some software work and 3D model something, you could be like, yes, I can do that. Do you know what I mean? You need to be able to round and learn, and like you say about the fruit market and picking up as many flavors as possible, also trying those
Mm.
flavors, educating yourself on those flavors, and
Exactly.
educating yourself on so many things as humanly possible, because obviously you can't learn everything about architecture because there's so much to learn, unless
Yeah.
you probably could, you might be able to learn everything, but good luck. um and yeah, it's important not to only get yourself out there and get yourself as employable as possible, but also once you're in the working environment, you can then adapt to any situation. We're back to the adaptation
Yeah.
conversation,
Exactly.
and
Exactly. Yeah.
using all of your skills, and you want to provide as much as possible for people.
Exactly. You're 100% right. You know, you might be in the office and you know, I've had it. I've had the experience where some, you know, as soon as I enter the office, they were like, all right, can you do these visuals? And it's like, oh, wow, I don't have to do toilet details. It's like, no, we have investors who want to do X, Y, and Z, and we want to show them crazy visuals. So I was like, wow, okay, I get to do some crazy visuals. So
Yeah,
luckily, I'd spent time doing crazy visuals, and obviously there's a level of realism you need in practice. So I was able to do that. But then the next, you know, let's say 5 months later, they were asking me to take on the role of a surveyor and measure staircases so that I can make technical drawings of them. It's like, you know, I could, you know, have a lot of petulance and be like, oh, I do have to do that, but you know, they're also embrace the technical and the detail aspects of it as well, which, you know, a lot of aspects in your course will encourage. So do everything you can. And I know it can sound overwhelming with Tom and I saying, you know, to the viewers that, you know, do everything and do as much as
yeah,
you can. That can sound overwhelming, but look at it in this way: have fun, have as much fun as you can, try as much as you can, and 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 when it comes to your kind of the closing off of your degree and your masters, you will naturally be, I argue, you will naturally be inclined to start being focused on specific things. Um, so, I mean, that's just my point of view, and you seem to agree. But I think other people might disagree with that, but that's also fine.
so after your undergraduate, I'm assuming you worked for a year before going into your masters, and did that help you shape your way of thinking and the way you wanted to go into your masters? Did that change? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I worked at a very very small practice, literally like 5 people, 6 people, um, and I the reason is I didn't actually want to go for like a hugely renowned, you know, giant firm.
Yeah.
I wanted to have hands-on experience in an intimate environment where I could learn from professionals who who could have a direct impact on my learning. Um, and I'm not saying that that doesn't happen in some big firms. You know, a lot of the time, giant firms operate as loads of small firms. They put you into little teams and different crews, so it can happen. But to have the entire practice kind of be for me to be a part of the entire practice and have an intimate level of learning was hugely beneficial. But it depends what everyone wants to do. There's so many factors when it comes to the type of wage you want, where you want to work, um, the type of learning you want to do, the type of practice you want to learn from. But for me, I knew I wanted to live in a decent area, and I don't live in the middle of London. I actually live sort of outside London, in Kent, in a place in Kent. So I was able to maintain a kind of the life I wanted to live, but also work at a very, very good practice who were doing a lot of work in London, but they were very small. And the skills I learned were priceless, honestly. I was sitting next to the architect and the director within, in the same room, and I was being directly kind of mentored by senior practitioners who themselves were part of giant firms before. Worked for ADAS, worked for Patel Taylors, worked for Hawkins Brown, places like that, Allies and Morrison. So all these people brought that experience with them. So in terms of, I would kind of recommend you to again be flexible with where you work in your first year and think about what you want. Because on the other side of things, you could say, actually, I haven't got that many kind of familial responsibilities, so I can be the kind of rogue, bachelor or single kind of person, just enjoying the hustle and bustle of London life. I tended to want to be away from that madness. I wanted to be away from that madness. But if you don't, then there are amazing options there for you to just go into a giant firm, get that on your CV. Unfortunately, it's the way it works. If you've got Fosters and Partners, or if you've got whatever, Grimshaw's or BDP or any big giant firm on your portfolio, on your CV, it kind of looks good. But I'll be honest with you, a lot of intelligent employers will see completely past that and be like, okay, you worked for them. All that means is that you are somewhat of a high achiever, because they usually accept people who have a higher level of of results and stuff. But your results are there on the table anyway, so they can see that. But a lot of employers will just be like, it doesn't matter. Actually, I'm looking for someone who has more experience. And someone like me, I'm not blowing my own trumpet, but someone like me, or I guess I am, someone like me who's worked at a practice where I've had so much more hands-on experience, leading projects, talking to clients directly, regularly, going to site visits very often. Someone at Foster's or someone at Grimshaw's or whatever these big firms are, some of them will have never have done some of these things. And that's absurd. They've spent their entire careers doing their entire sort of year out doing, plans of toilet details and things like that. So it's all about what you want. And again, let me make the disclaimer that not all big firms are like that. Some big firms are very fruitful places to work.
I think alongside that, as I was talking about the big and small firms, it's also about how much value can you provide to them as well. Being in a big firm, how valuable are you as an employee going to be for that firm, and how much value can you provide for them? Whereas if you're in a smaller firm, you can get your teeth kind of stuck in a little bit more. You might have a bit more of a presence. You might be a bit more involved in certain situations or drawings or projects or whatever. So there's also those kind of aspects to consider, because I get a lot of people asking me about placements and do I advise them to go to a smaller firm or a bigger firm? And I guess there's no real answer. I think you've got to test it out yourself and find out what kind of environment works best for you. Because some people might like the big firm environment and being with loads of employees and having that kind of big community space, where some people might like just being in a little bit of a smaller firm where there's that there might be greater interaction with the people and you've got a lot more involved, and you have a bit more authority or involvement or whatever. So I think it's all about, like, even discussing about the trial and error at university. It's exactly the same thing. You need to get yourself out there, trial and error, test places out. And essentially you're not going to find the right place for you if you're not going to get out there and try out different places. And I think it's also important not to kind of attach yourself to one place. And
the thing I love is the fact that architecture is so broad. It's such a as you say, even multidisciplinary field. We are trained as polymaths of the past. We have our feet in multiple pools of knowledge. We are simultaneously learning about the history of humanity sometimes, and learning about, the progressions in technological advancements.
And psychology.
So there's everything, you name it. We've dipped our feet in it, and you have to, in order to be able to come up with wholesome projects for particular contexts. So what I would say is, don't get passionate about the whole culture of architecture. Get passionate about what you love specifically about architecture, and it might be something that is which looks somewhat tangential. It might look like, but there are people who are incredible music, people who are passionate about music and making music and playing instruments. And they have a way of translating that passion into architecture. It's crazy. There are some people who are incredibly passionate about food and catering, and they find a way to translate that into architecture. And I'm sure you guys might have heard of Bumpus and Parr, who are they were a Bartlett graduate duo who ended up starting their own jelly making catering business with an architectural background. So yeah, be free and enjoy this process. I'm trying to encourage people here, but again, maybe another podcast that could be done is talking about actually where the problems are, because there are a lot of problems as well, I think.
And just to kind of finish that off, I think it's really, really important to within your studies and within architecture, finding ways to make it, how do I say this? Find ways to make it as enjoyable as possible for you. So tailor it towards your hobbies, tailor it towards the things you enjoy. So for me, my whole final year project was pretty much using film. So I've just got a massive passion in YouTube, filming, editing, kind of capturing these events and moments in time and breaking down these films into individual frames and capturing these moments and using this to speed up and slow down, and you can alter these events that happen along this timeline, all that kind of stuff. I just pretty much, all I did was I just thought I found an opportunity to use film and video to really drive my passion in that within architecture, which enabled me to kind of maintain that level of motivation and enjoyment throughout the whole entire project, which kept me going and going and going. And people would say, how do you stay so motivated? And a lot of the time it's just find ways that you can channel your hobbies and your excitement and things you enjoy within architecture. You could do anything. You can do absolutely 100%. Anything in architecture. Niche, you can do anything. You just got to find it. You just got to spend time. Like we say, it's all about trial and error. You'll sometimes it comes quickly to people, and sometimes people just understand that and have that realization quite early on, and they kind of click in kind of what they enjoy about it and where they want to go with it. But at the end of the day, it's all about trial and error, and you got to put yourself out there. You got to try things out, and essentially, it's all about finding ways to drive all your passion into it. It's difficult. It's difficult because obviously all of these topics are very, very broad.
And that's the thing. Some people will be like, oh, I'm not as passionate as you guys, or I don't. You guys have it easy. You're just obsessed with things, and it's like, I think everyone. First, I would say everybody has the potential to have a burning passion. And let's be honest, me and maybe yourself as well. Again, like I said, I don't wake up like today's going to be an awesome day of architectural practice, and I'm like dying to get back on my computer. I hate the fact that I have to go put my ass back on a computer chair and feel and have like pain in my back and all sorts of things.
Yep.
It's crippling.
Yeah.
But what I am saying is, look, you're part of a field that is so innovative, but at the same time very highly respected as a kind of as an intelligent field of knowledge, a kind of intelligent field of practical. It's a practical discipline. You know, it's a highly respected field. It sits in the same rankings as law and accounting and in medicine. You know, but at the same time, we have the potential to be artists and now I would say it's becoming more multidisciplinary. We have the potential to be filmmakers and musicians and chefs. So I echo what you're saying, which is, you know, fine. You know what your passion is. Let's be honest. You know what your passion is. If you don't, then one thing I would highly recommend, and even if you do have a passion, I would highly recommend, is continue exploring. You know, and that's why me and Tom are here for you, because through our podcasts you can explore many things.
Yeah, 100%. I could sit here all day talking about all this kind of stuff. So we might even have to do like a part 2 or something. But we'll dive into a Q&A now, because I've got quite a few questions that people have been asking on the Instagram. So even the first question I'd like to ask you, which people ask me a lot, and I'd like to get another opinion, because I've answered this question before, but I just want to see what someone else's opinion. Basically, do you need to be able to draw to study architecture?
How short and long do you want these answers?
We'll keep it fairly
or medium.
Keep it fairly snappy.
Okay, snappy. I'd say short answer. Do you need to draw? Yeah, you need to be able to draw. I would say what you define as being able to draw, that's relative. I would say there's a place for anyone to be able to exercise their artistic skills in architecture. And what I would say is you don't need to be a freaking Mozart to be able to represent a vision or an artistic vision. You know, sometimes, I mean, if you guys probably know that there's a distinct style of drawing when it comes to architectural practice, and it's not because, I mean, I don't think it's because somebody started a trend and now everybody is drawing with these kind of umbrella figures and these kind of stick trees. I think it's that for a reason, and the reason being that architecture is the kind of perfect balance between expressing conceptual ideas with realistic ideas. So you have this kind of semi-abstract style in architectural drawing, and in order to do representations like that, like I said, you don't need to be an incredible artist. You just need to have confidence to be able to put your pen or pencil down on paper and create a vision. And I think a lot of people just don't have the confidence sometimes to draw, because they think drawing is something is a skill you get incredibly good at. And yes, some people have spent their entire lives drawing and mastering the skills of sketch and shading and line pressure and all these things. But I would say it doesn't take a lot to be able to draw well, and that it's relative to what is actually a good drawing. Sometimes the most confident and bold drawing is actually the best drawing. And that's why a lot of time in architecture, practitioners draw very kind of simple drawings, but very bold. And you can tell by the lines that it's a confident drawing. So that's what I'd say.
And then a conversation I would
can't avoid drawing. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, but then also the conversation that you could bring into that is that obviously a lot of architecture now is computer-based and software-based. Do you need to be able to, there's that line between being able to draw physically, or I always discuss about the importance of drawing and sketching in terms of building ideas in projects and concepts, because it's so important to be able to sketch out ideas, because that is the best way to get thoughts in your head down on paper. And there's always that idea where people have got so many ideas, but they don't know how to get it down on paper. And a pencil and a
Exactly.
pen and a piece of tracing paper or sketchbook is that way to get something down on paper. And being sat on a software trying
Exactly.
to do that process, it's not going to work. But then at the same time, when
100%.
you actually become an architect, a lot of it is software based because it's efficient, it's quick, it's easy. You can generate all your drawings and everything through a software. So I think part of my argument would be, would you, like you say, you don't have to be like Picasso or whatever, but if you are not that great at drawing, I reckon
Just realized I said Mozart. Sorry.
most.
I said Mozart's a musician. I don't know why I said Mozart, but carry on.
But yeah, because I think it's also one of those skills that you can build it up. It's just practice, practice,
Definitely.
practice.
Definitely. But actually, I would contend that when I was working, I actually ended up drawing more.
Yeah,
So I was actually doing a lot more sketching. I was having to do a lot of tracing to come up with planning options. And when you guys start working, and some of you already have worked, you understand that there's stages in the architectural process, and one of the benefits of being at a small practice is that you get to be part of all of those stages. And in the
yep,
beginning stages, there's the feasibility stages, which is kind of most like, I guess, what we do in architecture school, where you're drafting up the concept of things. And there's a lot of drawing involved there. But again, remember, it's not you're not doing you're not doing Van Gogh style drawings there, or pieces of art there. You're doing very, very niche styles of drawing, which particular to architecture. So learning that is actually not that hard. And again, I would contend with you, and we're okay to have different opinions on this, but I would contend that even though we are moving towards even more technology, especially after COVID, uh, I think you also said it. You cannot escape, and that's why I said you can't avoid it. You can't escape having to just use that tool, the lead in your hand and your brain down to your fingertips and onto a piece of paper. You can't avoid that because it's such a valuable skill to use and to get good at.
yeah.
So yeah, definitely agree.
Next question. Best thing about being in architecture school? Honestly, we could have full on podcasts about these, but
Yeah, these are episodes,
try and
aren't they?
keep this as short as possible.
Best thing about architecture school.
For me, whilst you think, I'm going to quickly jump in. I think the best thing about studying architecture, I guess, is the fact that there are endless possibilities, and it's like this challenge of tackling all of these possibilities within architecture and all these ideas. There's never a right or wrong.
Hmm.
And I think for me, the most enjoyable thing out of it is that, like we mentioned, you can do whatever you want. It's such a crazy course. You can tailor it to anything. You can tailor it to anything that you enjoy. And I think that's the one thing that I enjoy most about it, is that it's just, there's so many possibilities behind anything.
Yeah, that's a good one. I would definitely echo that. But if I was to say something different, mine would be the fact that architecture school or architectural studies is a place that prepares you for doing something in the real world in an incredibly creative way. And I'd say the thing I love about architecture school, and why this argument of, does architecture school actually prepare you for the working environment? And trust me, I've been on both sides, fluctuating, trying to make my mind up. But the thing I love about, especially the British kind of architectural establishment, is we maintain that level of openness and flexibility and freedom in what you're allowed and what you're kind of motivated to do in architecture school. And at the same time, those crazy creative ideas where some people could be doing just the most crazy things, and some people doing the most incredibly technological things that they all eventually aim to translate into the real world. Or they don't have to. Sometimes people go off into theory and research. So the fact is, I love the fact that architecture school allows the creative freedom, but with a deep focus on the real world.
It gives you opportunities. And then we'll finish up on this question. Did you always want to study architecture? And how?
No.
Again, and how did you understand that you wanted to be an architect? If you do want to be an architect.
What's crazy is I have similar story to you in some ways, and I wanted to go into film. I wanted to either go into acting or go into film studies. And when I was 18, I started a designer brand, a brand for design philosophy called twoworldsdesign, and that started off as a clothing line and has now become an architectural brand or platform of some sort. So for me, no, I was interested in film, and the weird thing for me is I knew that I always wanted to do something as creative as possible, because I was always predisposed to art and creative activities. But I also knew that I wanted to do something in the real world, and to do something that is very, very practical in the real world as well. So, film maybe was a bit of a tangent when because I went to an art school and I was exposed to all sorts of things. But I guess I didn't know up until the very last moment that I wanted to go into architecture. It was a really last minute decision, and almost convinced by my dad to just do it. And only when I got into it, and I spent a couple of years in my bachelor's, and I was actually almost failing my first and second year. And when it suddenly clicked for me that this is a profession that is so flexible, that allows us to do many, many different things in many, many different ways, I suddenly started devoting myself to this field, and I ended up doing very well in university after that. So it's a strange thing to admit that I wasn't even passionate about architecture properly until my second year, sort of halfway through. It's I would say it's relatively easy subject to get into, with a high kind of, what's regarded as quite a high level field. There are many ways to get into it. You could, just do your A levels and get in, or, even me, like I went through a really kind of odd path. I just went through a foundation course, kind of experimenting with loads of things, and then ended up kind of getting accepted into an architecture course. So there's many ways to get into it as well.
Yeah. I think people need to understand that as well, because obviously a lot of people are in positions where they feel like they should be passionate about architecture. At that age, they feel like they should be passionate about something, and they feel like they need direction. But at the end of the day, a lot of people don't find what they truly love and enjoy until, well, some people never find what they truly love and enjoy. But I think at the same time, I think us two have been quite blessed at a young age to kind of have that realization and that understanding, and kind of finding what we enjoy and what we're passionate about. And I mean, I'm only 20. I reckon I'll have loads of ups and downs, and there'll be loads of things that I'll discover about myself and the things I enjoy and don't enjoy. And you will continue to evolve and change, but I think you just got to let that happen and just not kind of be anxious and hold yourself back because of that.
Yeah. I also do want to say that there are many, and I remember thinking, I don't want to come on here and discourage anyone, but there are also a lot of issues. There are a lot of issues in architecture education. People feel that they're not being taught certain things that prepare them for the workplace. But what, I personally, I'm writing about these kind of issues, and I'm exploring them further. And I think what we're going through right now, and you might be observing it as well, is there's a more radical shift going on towards multidisciplinary ventures in architecture, embracing completely different fields For example, what I was talking to you about, the jelly making duo, Bumpus and Parr, even someone else I spoke to in my podcast, Chris Hildry, who's doing governmental projects, working with the government to tackle kind of a data issue. There's someone else, Adam Furman, I also spoke to, who's kind of, he stopped his architecture education post part 2 and went off and became an independent designer for ceramics and interiors and things like that. So although I think there are a lot of problems, I wouldn't discourage people from getting on the train and for really pushing it now, because usually after there's a big problem, there's massive opportunities. And I think we're about to get into a place, especially after COVID, where there are going to be some huge changes and positive changes within this field.
Yeah.
And I also throw in one or two more books I had, and it might be useful for people.
Yeah, go on.
So another one that's really crazy book is called A Pattern Language. And that isn't a crazy book because it's essentially a full encyclopedia of how to, it sounds crazy, but how to design anything.
Yeah.
It's a really strange and pivotal book. So I definitely want to throw that out there. And again, one thing I'm personally reading about, if people are interested in Britain and history and culture, then someone I'm quite close to, a professor at our university and at the Bartlett, Shahid Salim, had recently done a book with historic England called The British Mosque. So if anyone's interested in concepts of history, especially in the UK and vernacular and vernacular architecture, to definitely read The British Mosque.
Yeah, nice one. I think we'll wrap it up there because my camera's about to die. So
yeah, sorry for talking so much, man.
No, it's good. I enjoyed that. I thought that was a very, very good podcast. I'm not going to lie. I really enjoyed that. We'll have to do this again at some point because we've clearly got a lot of stuff we can ramble on about.
Yeah, for sure.
So thank you for coming on. Do you want to plug yourself at all?
Yeah, man, thanks for having me. I really appreciate. I like the fact that there's also this change happening now where there's a bunch of content creators now taking a much more serious approach with architecture, and you seem to be quite up there with the leaders, especially in YouTube, because there's obviously a market, and there's a gap in the market in the UK, I think, when it comes to architectural content creators. And I like the fact that we are, and I would consider myself coming into that field as well with my podcast. But I like the fact that we're doing this in a nice way. We're trying to share our networks and we're trying to kind of collaborate. So my podcast is called the Design Talks Podcast. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on all audio platforms as well. And I've got a lot of exciting episodes coming out soon. And hopefully, once this lockdown is done, I'll get Tom on as well. We can talk about you.
Yeah, let's do it.
And then I've also got sort of Two Worlds Design is the main kind of design philosophy brand, which also showcases all of my work. So if you guys want to see any of that, just go to my Instagram, Two Worlds Design, all words. And yeah.
Nice one.
Thanks, man.
Thank you very much. So yeah, thank you for listening to the #1 student podcast in the world, the Student Podcast. If you've got any questions, obviously just let me know in the comment section down below. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening to this on Spotify or iTunes, just message me on Instagram. Or if you've got any questions for Hamza, I'll just message him as well. So it's at Tom Rose Studios for me, and obviously Two Worlds Design for Hamza. So yeah, thank you, people. See you next time.